Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is Derek Rogers, and you may have watched part one of our 3Ds series with Fred Williams from Real Science Radio, and you may be wondering, how do people believe this garbage? How do people believe in a day and age when science has proven there is no God? This earth is billions of years old. It's all been created by a big bang, millions and millions of years of chance processes, random activities, lightning bolts striking pond scum, cells formed and eventually evolved over many, many millions, billions of years into human beings and all the creatures we see on Earth and the system that we see in place right now. It all happened over this long process. How does anybody believe anything different than that? Well, you could probably blame it on this dang book. This book has changed people's lives, minds, wrecked them, because it says something different. It says that there is a creator of the universe that created us with an intelligence, and that he loves us, and that he cares for us, and that this world was designed, and it may be much, much younger. In fact, I would say it is much, much younger than they say, that a lot of these processes that we don't understand, that we proclaim that we do, were much faster processes. And so this brings us to the second part of our interview with Fred. And this time we're talking about the last two arguments of the 3D argument, the 2Ds, diamonds, and DNA. And we're just going to get right into it with Fred and see what he has to say. Stay tuned to the end for a special message during this season. You'll notice a Christmas tree in the back.
My king's coming back, that's what I'm banking on. We eat and celebrate the grace of God with that filet mignon. I'm just saying we came a long way from in the
that,
grave.
Derek, takes us through the dinosaurs, and then we could talk about diamonds, the second D, and this one won't take as long. If you want me, I'll just go ahead and jump into that. So,
Yeah, let's go through it
okay.
quick, and then we'll get to the DNA, which is
It's,
shockingly good.
yeah, it's super powerful. So we like to talk about diamonds because of something called carbon-14. So a lot of people think that carbon-14 shows that the Earth is millions of years old, billions of years old. Well, carbon-14 has a short half-life of like 5,700 years, so you can't date it past anything, 50,000 years old. That's the limit, because you've got these tools now that are very precise in counting carbon-14 atoms, these mass spectrometry devices. And what happens is, using those devices, the best they can do is maybe 50,000 years date something back, because after that, it can't detect enough carbon-14 atoms because of all the noise that is introduced into the system. But it does a really good job of narrowing things down. But again, you can't really count past 50,000 years. So that's the theoretical limit, or really the limit for carbon dating. So I'm showing a slide now so that people understand what carbon-14 is. So basically the sun spits out neutrons, and in the atmosphere there's nitrogen atoms. And what happens is these neutrons every now and then break a piece of that atom loose, and it turns it into carbon-14. Well, that's radioactive, and what's going to happen is the carbon-14 is going to decay over time back into nitrogen. And so there's a half-life of that happening of 5,700 years. So what happens is carbon-14 is absorbed by, say, plants, and then animals eat the plants, and then when the animal dies, that carbon-14 starts decaying, and you can look at the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 to kind of come up with a date. So the problem with diamonds are a very hard substance, yet we find carbon-14 in them. So when they were formed, 6,000 years ago, there was some carbon-14 in them. There should be none if the Earth is billions of years old. It should have been gone within 50,000 years. So whenever that diamond formed, millions of years ago, a million years plus 50,000 years, there should be no carbon-14. So we like diamonds because you can't blame it on contamination. Scientists who are super careful and extracting these diamonds, taking them to the lab, they invariably find carbon-14. It's a powerful argument against an old Earth because they cannot explain carbon-14. And in fact, if you look at other things that have carbon-14 in it, and this is from the journal Radiocarbon. It's not a journal that's created by creationists. They've reported carbon-14 in natural gas, in coal, in oil, and other petroleum products. And by the way, we have links to all the scientific papers at rsr.org/C14. You can go there if you want to see the actual scientific studies that show this. They find it in fossilized wood, coal, marble, deep groundwater, geological graphite, dinosaur bones, and as reported at Science Direct, short-lived 14C is regularly found even in supposedly billion-year-old diamonds. That's why we want to emphasize diamonds. Why are they finding it there and everywhere else? It's a powerful argument against the Earth being billions of years old. It can't be, because you can't explain the carbon-14. And yet, Derek, we can, because guess what? There's something that happened about 5,000 years ago that buried a lot of carbon around the globe, and that's called a global flood. And that's why we have carbon-14 in all of these things I just mentioned. You can't get around it. It's inescapable. And, you know, you can go to that carbon-14 page of ours and look at the common objections that the scientists, how they try to explain it away, and none of them work. Neutron capture, all these things simply do not work. We've talked to scientists who are in those fields, and they admit they don't work. And it's just it's a powerful argument against an old Earth.
I've heard arguments that say that carbon-14 is the least accurate form of dating. Like we can't, with carbon-14, we can actually observe the decay rates in our lifetime.
Correct. And yeah, there are issues with how much equilibrium is there between C12, C14, and all these other things, but we don't really care about that, because the bottom line is carbon-14 is like an hourglass with sand going from the top to the bottom, and that is going to all those carbon-14 atoms are going to be turned into nitrogen-14 within 50,000 years. At least detectable amounts of carbon-14. So you shouldn't be able to find detectable carbon-14 atoms in any of this stuff if they're millions of years old. They're clearly not. And again, you find carbon-14 everywhere. They can't explain it away. They do, but they can't. You know, it's sometimes they just ignore the problem. But it's a huge elephant in the room, and it's great evidence against an old Earth. The Earth is not millions of years old.
That's so cool. And we've been able to produce diamonds at a much faster rate too, right? In labs.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Using pressure and heat, and that's really
But it's a hard material, and it's harder for things to escape out of it. There's so many other evidences we could get into, Derek, but that's one that we think people can understand. You know, there's helium in zircons, that helium shouldn't be in zircons. We've proven scientifically with independent labs that the diffusion rate of helium in zircons, and it shows that those rocks could only be 6,000 years old. There's lots of cool stuff in creation that supports the biblical account.
That's awesome. Yep. I love it when people argue that there's absolutely no evidence for a flood on the earth anywhere. It's like everywhere you look, there's evidence of a flood.
It's just those stories that try to get around problems like the global flood. There's so much evidence for it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the hydroplate theory, and I want to have somebody on at some point to interview on that. Maybe you can connect me with
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's quite a few. It's to me, it's definitely the best theory, the best flood theory. There's so much that validates it, and again, what we can see with our own eyes. The asteroid Bennu, and how they've discovered this material on it that comes from the mid-oceanic ridge. I mean, how cool is that? This is it's like NASA scientists working, for Walt Brown.
So that's diamonds. Now we're going into DNA, the third D.
Yep.
What do you got on that?
Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics because as an engineer, DNA is a program code. It's software, basically. It's a blueprint. And what's so cool about DNA as a software program is scientists have discovered that if you read DNA backwards, it does another function. So what I tell people is imagine writing a book that tells a story and then read the book backwards, and it tells an entirely coherent, different story. Good luck in doing that. And it's just remarkable. There's no way that that could evolve naturalistically. It's impossible. So here's an article I'm showing, and this is from 10 years ago, but this is where scientists discovered double meaning in genetic code. And they said the scientists discovered a second code hidden within the DNA. And this is what I'm referring to, reading in a different direction. They've actually found, according to the late Kevin Anderson, who is heavily involved in this science, that they've got 12 different codes you could have packed into one, section of DNA, just depending on how you read it, what direction you read it in. It's remarkable. Oh, wow. And this scientist, he's a secular scientist, this doctor, and I'm not going to try to say his name, Derek, because it's like Stemma Toya Napolis. It's right. Amazing. Yes. Yeah. So there you can look up his name, but just to give you an example, I've got a slide here. You've got this DNA sequence that programs the DNA to build an antibody to fight infection. So imagine that sentence, because really DNA it's syntax, meaning, and it's sentences and words, paragraphs. It's very analogous to that. And if you read it the other direction, it says, oh, by the way, when add more when it's cold outside. So you have ways in the genes that regulates how much of a protein is built. And so if you mutate just one spot of that, the thing is you're going to damage both of the codes, not just one. And so this gives an example of what happens. So then it's not going to regulate it properly. And here's what this scientist said. The fact that the genetic code can simultaneously write two kinds of information means that many DNA changes that appear to alter protein sequences may actually cause disease by disrupting gene control programs or even both mechanisms simultaneously. There's no way that this is something that evolved. This is clearly a remarkable and indescribable design. And we're not even getting into the whole quality control mechanism that works to prevent this from happening, which is itself incredible. And this particular scientist, he has to bow to the gods of evolution, to the people that fund his projects. So he throws this into his article. These two meanings seem to have evolved in concert with each other. Oh, okay, explain how those things evolved, Mr. Evolutionist. It's not tenable. It's just so to try to explain it. Derek, it's just one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, it's when DNA, this is in our lifetime that this science has come out. And to me, it was already clear that they should have turned in their badges for evolution. Because if there's a coder, if there's a code like this, there is a coder. It's clear. We know that to be fact. Yes, there can be mathematical, crystallization that occurs in a faction or in a pattern. Based on mathematics, but that mathematics also comes from an intelligence, we could argue, right? So, so this to me is clear. We got code. It's not just a bunch of letters randomly placed down. It's designed. It has meaning. The meaning is translated and understood. It's not just flowing with no interpretation to it. It means something and it accomplishes things. That means it's designed. There's an intelligent designer.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, information science says that if you have information, you have to have an information giver, and this you can't get around it. And the discoverer of DNA, one of the co-discoverers, was Francis Crick. And it was so overwhelming to him. Now, he doesn't want to give up his commitment to atheism, because it's never been about the science. It's whether or not, you're rebelling against God, and you don't want to be part of God. You resist God no matter what. So he saw the science doesn't support it. So he became what's called a panspermist, or he believes in panspermia, which means aliens seeded this information on our planet. So all he does is push the problem back into space. Okay, who created the aliens? It just doesn't work. I'm showing a slide here from the fairly well-known evolutionary microbiologist. His name's James Shapiro from the University of Chicago. He said there are no detailed Darwinian accounts for the evolution of any fundamental biochemical or cellular systems, only a variety of wishful speculations. So whenever scientists attempt to grapple with this really insurmountable problem, they have to resort to wishful speculations. So we've got the science on our side, without a doubt.
And DNA is just one of the codes. Now we're discovering there's way more than that going on. Right?
Exactly, because they've got a coding section, and then the non-coding section they're finding is really critical for regulatory sequences. And I'm showing now an article, and this is just from June of 2024. There's been this thing with junk DNA for quite some time. It's been refuted over and over again, but there's evolutionist scientists out there on YouTube trying to claim, the DNA is still junk. Professor Dave makes this claim, and it's totally bogus. Francis Collins admitted as much. He thought the DNA was 97% junk, and he eventually came around. He's like, I don't think any of it's junk. And so there's a lot of important roles of this so-called junk DNA. We're showing an article here, and this is from a Colorado University research instructor. And why is this even still coming up in the news? Because junk DNA was refuted a long time ago. And here's a recent one, Derek.
So just to make the point on that, so junk DNA is basically what they're saying is that DNA in itself is a leftover of evolution, or parts of it are leftover junk. They have no function. And that proves evolution is what they're saying, right?
Yeah, they say that you'd expect, that with that much junk, it's leftover useless stuff. And also just it provides material for things to evolve, because then there could be, maybe down the road some function added to some part of the junk DNA. Eugenie Scott, when I first started watching Bob Enyart that I mentioned at the start of our show here, he debated Eugenie Scott, and it was really good. It was on back when he was on TV, on the Bob Enyart live show. It was so good. And she was the spokesperson for the National Education Association, which, by the way, I'm hoping our current leaders get rid of that Department of Education, but we'll see what happens there. But she said that when he asked her, what's your 3 best evidences for evolution? From what I recall, the only one she came up with, she actually only came up with one, and that was junk DNA, that 97% of the DNA is useless. And so Bob challenged her at the time. He said, he asked her, how much do we really know about, the genome and genetics? How much would you say we've learned? And she says, we've learned most everything we're going to know about it. And this is back in, I think, roughly 1996, 97, 98 timeframe. Well, she was wrong. And she's been since disproven over and over again. And it's no longer an argument for evolution. There's huge ramifications on this, Derek, beyond what we're just talking about. Because if you've got more functional DNA in the genome, the mathematics becomes really, really impossible to explain how we could have evolved, say, from a common ancestor with chimps. Because more functional DNA means there's more areas where change has to occur. And if you do the calculations, you would have to have more than the number of molecules in the universe of offspring to evolve anything. That's how bad the math is for them. And you can go back and look at our show with Sal Cordova on how ENCODE has refuted evolution. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So that equation's kind of flipped now, right? Like it's more, they're saying 97% is functional, and there might be 3% of junk DNA.
Well, it depends
Or
on
is
who
it-
you talk to, but I personally haven't seen like explicit numbers of, that it's 97% functional. I know Francis Collins said that it's mostly all functional, but we just haven't, there's of the parts that we don't know about, we'll find out down the road that they're functional. And, we may find a small percentage that isn't functional anymore because we are under the curse, and there is a genetic load that happens every generation where, we're losing a little bit of, genetic integrity every generation. It's not severe. Some people say it's so bad that we'll all be dead in 1,000 years. That's not true, and it doesn't match the science, but we are deteriorating every generation. We're slightly worse off than the prior generation. And, Derek, this one, just this month, in December 2024, a new discovery. They found tens of thousands of hidden dark genes. And what this is, they're finding these genes that they say they play a critical role in processes. And they're tiny proteins. So that's why they missed them before. So they're little chunks that have a function in this supposedly junk DNA portion of the DNA, the non-coding part. So they found tens of thousands of them discovered in humans. So the data keeps pouring in. The nails keep getting bigger into the coffin of evolution, but we'll keep pounding them in, Derek.
There we go. So these dark genes are they part of the the DNA, or are they outside of that, like in RNA or in like I've heard there's coding outside of the cell as well.
Yeah, like with the RNA, with transcribing the DNA. But these are actually sequences inside our DNA. They refer to them as hidden sequences that code for tiny proteins. So, yeah, it's so cool. All the things we're learning with the ENCODE project. The ENCODE project has been the death knell of evolution. Honestly, it's the end of evolution. So there's just no getting around it. And one other thing I did want to quickly talk about was transposons. There's these jumping genes where the mechanisms within the cell will slice a piece of DNA and insert it into a different part. It's amazing. I mean, imagine a programmer doing that. If anybody's listening who has any kind of even minor programming skills, try writing a program where you slice out a part of your code and then you insert it somewhere else to do a function, and just do this all the time. They're called jumping genes, and it's just remarkable. The design is beyond our comprehension. We're learning about it little by little, but there's so much more to be learned. And honestly, I think Christ will come back before we even get 10% of the way through of how his program works. It's so elaborate.
So do they know what function this serves? Or are they still just trying to discover
that's a good question.
Like, I was wondering if it's one of the mechanisms of debugging that happens, where the DNA kind of regulates itself to remove errors and copy mistakes.
Yeah, you wonder if it's part of the quality control system, which is incredibly elaborate, and that could be, yeah. I think it's involved also in immune responses, things like that. When our body takes in a foreign invader, something that the body is designed to fight. If we have something, a virus or a bacteria or something that shouldn't be in our body, then our immune system turns on. And I believe transposons are involved in that, but don't quote me on that. And if it's wrong, I'm sorry for that, but it doesn't remove the argument that as a designer, as an engineer, I've spent my, almost 40 years into my career of, being on, major design teams for really big projects over the years, and writing a lot of software, working with a lot of hardware engineers. This stuff is so beyond that. It's so much more complicated and elegant too. It's efficient. It's just remarkable. Can't put it into words. So remarkable.
It's cool. Cool to see. So that takes us through all the 3Ds.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode. There's a message coming up from Fred that kind of matches the season that we're in, but I just want to say Please like, subscribe, and share as we play this out, this last little message. Hit the notification bell if you want to get notified. Remember that you can put in prayer requests. Just put prayer, and whatever your prayer request is in the comments, and we will pray for you. I will pray for you. There's other people that watch this program that will also pray for you. Just know that that's going to be visible to everybody because it's in the comments on YouTube, of course, or on Rumble, depending on where you're watching this.
You know, we can trust the Bible, and the Bible tells true history. And whenever the Bible touches on science, it's accurate. And we know that there's overwhelming evidence that Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be. He died, rose from the dead, and we just hope we get more people to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And you know, Derek, it's so easy. It's a free pass handed right to you because we don't deserve it, but it's right there for the taking. Accept his free gift of salvation. And he paid that price already for us on the cross. So we can believe the Bible
Amen.
Is true by looking at the science. His invisible attributes are clearly seen, looking at his works, and we can know that he is who he says he is.
Amen. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our interview. That was an awesome way to end it.
To reaching the top of the summit, I was about yay high when Yahweh told me to run it. Only a matter of time before my mob needed hitting 100. I swore a sign, he told me to pay more attention, he already done it.